here, which is pretty cool also, because this drives home the importance of packaging, is the brain. So the only way you can get omega-3s across the blood-brain barrier, there's a small amount that can make its way across through other mechanisms, but the main way, the majority of the way, 80 to 90% plus, is through something called an MFSD28 transporter. And in order for you to get access across the blood-brain barrier, DHA has to be in what's called an LPC form, which is lysophosphatidylcholine. So if it's not in that LPC form, it's kind of like it comes to that doorway in the blood-brain barrier, and it basically is scanning you to see like, hey, are you an LPC or not? If you're not an LPC, you don't get to fit into the door. You don't get access into the brain, which means you don't get access to the retina, where all the areas where you need a ton of DHA, especially, right? So it's pretty cool because one of the things SmartPrime does is MSM forces you to be more in that LPC and more in that phosphatidylcholine form.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then that kind of, leads us down into, now that it's in the phosphatidylcholine form, why is that important? Because now it can participate in all of these important, downstream processes, like, the business end of fish oil, the business end of omega-3s, right? And omega-6s too, but yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah. So does that clarify it in terms of first pass versus second pass? And
Yeah, definitely clears it up.
Oh, there is one thing that I would say, it's almost like a hypothetical counter to that, or like a suggestion. It's like, well, why can't you just consume like krill oil or salmon roe? Because salmon roe has a lot of, it's in the phospholipid form. There's a lot of phospholipid form of EPA, DHA in krill. There's a very small amount. There's some issues with, there's trade-offs, right? There's pros and cons. Like if you take krill, it has a very small amount per gram of krill oil. You've probably seen a lot of the available products on the market. When you look at the back, you're like, wow, that only has like 200 milligrams of EPA DHA per serving, krill. But yet it's claimed to be more bioavailable, and in many ways it is, because it's already in the phospholipid form. All that means is there's other enzymes called phospholipases in the gut as well that can cleave it faster. And there's also free-form fatty acids as part of the krill complex, krill oil. Those do get absorbed faster into the lymphatics, and they make their way into the blood faster, and they get incorporated into your cells and tissues faster. Mm-hmm. So if you were running a race and you were to ask me, what type of oil, fish oil would I, or marine omega-3 oil would I use? If I was measuring your total amount of EPA or DHA or omega-3 index within the first 3 to 7 days or the first day, then I would say yes, milligram for milligram, 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA delivered as krill, which would take probably 10 or 15 grams of krill to do that much. But still, if you have 500 milligrams of krill delivered versus 500 milligrams of fish oil, like in the triglyceride form, the krill would win the race, right? The sprint. But after 2 to 3 weeks or beyond, there's actually very little to no difference in terms of tissue levels of DHA and EPA between krill and triglyceride form, or even ethyl ester form if you take it with a fat source. Long term, there's really very little difference between them. But the issue there in terms of, well, it's already in the phospholipid form, right? Salmon roe, for example. There's actually a lot of DHA and EPA in salmon roe, especially DHA, that's already in the phosphatidylcholine form, which is great, you would think. The only problem is that human digestion doesn't work that way. We don't just take that molecule intact the way we consume it. It doesn't remain that way throughout the entire, traveling throughout the body and getting absorbed in lymphatics, like I said, being broken down by these enzymes, these esterases and these lipases. it doesn't work that way. So it still gets broken down into its components and then repackaged. It has to be
Okay,
unpacked and then repacked anyway.
I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, so it's kind of redundant. If it is in
Yeah.
that phospholipid form initially, it's still got to get broken down and then repackaged into it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's the I guess counterpoint to the counterpoint, I guess, of, if someone says, well, why don't you just take it already in its phospholipid form?
Yeah.
There are other benefits, right? Is like, well, you're also getting a little choline too, right? So you're getting a choline source, which is important, right? We need choline as well,
Right.
and we're typically deficient. But those are other, other reasons and other little side benefits that are not as important in this case. Yeah.
Let me see. I wanted to ask. So basically, if you have someone who has like issues with insulin resistance or severe inflammation or something like that, so their ability to package omegas into phosphocholine is inhibited, right? So I think you said they mostly would package it into the phosphoethanolamine.
Correct. PE. Yeah. So they'll be stuck in the PE versus the PC form. Too
Okay,
much.
so
And when it's in the PE form, it gets put in a different part of the leaflet of the membrane, and that's pretty like in the weeds and pretty technical. But the long and short of it is that it's kind of like sequestered. It's stuck. It doesn't get to participate in all of the cool things that EPA and DHA do for reducing inflammation and having antithrombotic effects, and the resolution, the resolvins benefits and the prostaglandin benefits and all these other signaling benefits. Yeah.
okay. So let's say you had someone who's like, I guess, healthy, or at least they think they're healthy. How would taking something like Smart Prime, would that still help their efficiency into packing into phosphocholine? Which I think you kind of already answered that with just by having a larger pool of those omegas in the beginning, right? That would still kind of help that balance for them.
Yeah, you're more efficient, right? So you're able to do more with less, or you're able to do more with more. You're able to do more with whatever omega-3 you're already consuming, right? So if you're combining it, you're amplifying the benefits of whatever omega-3 you are taking. And if you're already healthy and you don't have chronic inflammation, and you're not, insulin resistant, and you don't have metabolic syndrome, you're still going to benefit from all the other I guess the like levers that you're able to pull because of the even just having the sesamin and the MSM together in what we're doing here in enhancing the signaling. I mean, for example, sesamin by itself at the doses that we have it in, and sesamolin and sesamol, those compounds themselves are incredibly powerful, but you need to have them at the right dose. I mean, there are some products on the market that have like 5 to 10 milligrams of sesamin that they add, into fish oil, et cetera. But those are very small doses, and those are almost there just to almost be like antioxidant to protect the oil from going rancid or being oxidized. But in the body, when you're taking in north of, say, 20 to 30 to 60 or more milligrams of the lignans, the lignan complex, I mean, you're doing some really cool things on a gene expression level. So you're turning on genes like for beta oxidation, for example. Like you're turning on these things like PPAR alpha. You're doing dual PPAR alpha, PPAR gamma activation. These are like nuclear receptors that help signal to the DNA to turn on some genes that are important in how your body handles carbs and lipids and fats and metabolism in general. So it kind of turns on the metabolic machinery a little bit, right? Which is great, and in and of itself has some anti-inflammatory benefits that have been shown in stressed human models of inflammation like rheumatoid arthritis and those conditions. It's been shown to help reduce blood pressure. Anywhere between 4 to 6, I've seen as much millimeters of mercury. So 4 to 6 to 7 points on systolic, and diastolic, a little less on diastolic. But that moves the needle. You know, that's almost like probably what you would get from baseline like intervention with a little bit of an ACE inhibitor, an ARB, or some other blood pressure medicine. You know,
Hmm,
so
interesting.
it's good for blood pressure, endothelial function. Um, there have been studies looking at lipid profiles in general too on that amount of sesamin, let alone again in the combination and in the complex that we have, which is more unique because we've screened both black and white sesame seed and done a unique profile and a combination of these lignans to try to amplify those benefits.
Mhm.
So you should see some really you should see some dramatic and impressive movement in your lipid profiles. Even if you just did like before and after 12 weeks, you should see like if you do an NMR lipid profile, you know, where you look at particle size and HDL, LDL, VLDL, triglycerides, um, you know, most people should see you should move the needle in optimizing your lipid profile as well as like particle size and everything. Yeah,
Wow, that's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So it's pretty cool. In your product, obviously, you've got a good dose per serving of a good high quality triglyceride version or triglyceride form of EP and DHA, right? If I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken.
yeah, it's 1600 EPA, 1200 of DHA per serving. So
That's awesome. Yeah. So you're almost right at that like 3 gram, you know, mark, you know, which is a
yeah,
great target to have. You know, anywhere between 3 to 6 grams of omega 3 seems to be where, you know, some really cool things happen. Um, So you're right there. You're right at that great dose. And in the triglyceride form, one of the benefits is you can take it on a like you don't have to take it with a huge meal or a big fat rich lipid rich meal. You could take it almost on an empty stomach and still absorb most of it, which is great.
okay,
As opposed to ethyl ester where you really have to take it with a fat source with lipids in order for you to get effective sort of you know incorporation into
right,
tissue.
right, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, I think that that answers all my questions. I think that's about it. I mean, I think people will get a lot of out of this, learn a lot of things that they didn't know about, and yeah, we'll see how the reaction is. So
Yeah,
I mean, thank you for coming on and taking the time out of your day to help explain this to people, and I really think it's going to pay off.
yeah, my pleasure, Will. This is great. I think you know, you're one of the early adopters. Yeah, there's going to be a big wave now of other brands
I've
coming
heard that
on
already.
with SmartPrime, but you were one of the early adopters, so I commend you for seeing the value and the science behind it. And you know, it can be a little complex at first, but I think when you break it up high level, like layers of like pool packaging and processing, and just amplifying or optimizing your omega threes, either in your background diet or in supplementation. I think that kind of just drives home the main message.
No, yeah, I agree. All right. Well, I think that that'll do it. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, cool. We'll be in touch.